Handouts from last week too, if you missed it, you'd like to copy.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody have a handout? So need the handout? Before we get started in the class, I have some laws and principles to talk to you about. Who's familiar with the Peter principle? Some of the men talked about it last week. Employees are promoted based on success in their current position until they reach their level of incompetence and are no longer promoted. And then we have the Dilbert principle. Anybody heard of that one? Dilbert principle. Comic strip. The Dilbert principle, companies tend to systematically promote incompetent employees to management to get them out of the workflow. You ever seen that before? Then we have Parkinson's law. Ever heard of Parkinson's law? Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. In other words, if you give me 30 minutes, I'm going to take 30 minutes. Then we have Cunningham's law. You not familiar with Cunningham's law? I'm not sure. The best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question, but to post the wrong answer. Gotta get some response. Then we have Murphy's Law. Everybody knows Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But how about Yprum Law? And it's spelled Y-H-P-R-U-M. Pronounced Yprum. No idea. Anybody ever heard of that?
Spell it again.
Y-H-P-R-U-M. It's pronounced Yprum. Anything that can go right will go right. And what it is the opposite, a reverse of Murphy's Law. And if you spell Murphy backwards, that's what you get. So it's just the opposite of Murphy's Law. Backwards of Murphy's Law. So for you visitors, you always get more than what you pay for in my class. I try to do that.
What law is that?
Henley's law. That's Lynn's law. So anyway, welcome to our class. We begin a new series today. On the back side, page 4 of your handout is the schedule, is the plan schedule. Of course, like I said, I have to deal with too many attorneys, so I always put some loopholes in there. It is subject to change, but that depends on, weather and other stuff. But you can see the topics that we're going to be talking about, hopefully in the next 13 weeks. And it's based on a book by Cecil Nate, and it's called Providence, the Silent Sovereignty of God. He wrote this about 6 or 8 years ago, but I just recently heard about it and got a copy and was reading it and approached the elders about it, and they say, that sounds good, let's do it. So, but on the bottom of your handout, It's the website. If you miss a week and you need a copy of the handout, I'll try to post that usually by Friday or Saturday. And if you have any questions or comments or corrections or whatever, there's my email address. And yes, I still use an AOL email. I have others, but the AOL is the one I've had the longest, and that's the one I use the most. So.
That's Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law. Yeah. Who all knows or knows of Cecil May? Okay. We have some folks here that used to live in Meridian, Mississippi. Probably knew him when he was at Kosciuszko. Just to give you a little bio on him, and you'll hear me referring to him sometimes as Dr. May. You'll also hear me referring to him as Cecil, because I believe I am on a first-name basis with him, because he's been friends with my parents for a long time. And then when I went back to Montgomery to get my bachelor's at Faulkner, he was already on staff there, and because of his connection with my parents, he and I kind of got a personal relationship. And he goes by and sees my mom even today when he's down in her area. But Dr. Mays is the Dean Emeritus of the B.P. Black College of Biblical Studies at Faulkner University in Montgomery. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Biblical Languages from Harding University, a Master of Arts degree and a Master of Divinity degree from Harding University Graduate School of Theology, and an honorary LLD from Freed-Hardeman University. He's also served as president of Magnolia Bible College in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, dean of Heritage Christian University in Florence, Alabama, and a Bible teacher at Columbia Christian College in Portland, Oregon. He's been a minister of the gospel for several congregations in Mississippi and one in Oregon. And y'all were with him in Vicksburg, is that right? When he was at Vicksburg. He is the editor of Preacher Talk, which is a little quarterly newsletter he puts out through Faulkner. Only 4 pages, very short, but it has some very good articles in it. And he'll send that to you for free. I'll leave a few of these up here if you want to look at them later. Don't run off with them. I treasure those. So, not because of who wrote them, but because of what he's writing about. He also writes a back page column for the Gospel Advocate called Finally Brethren. He authors a Bible questions answer column in the Magnolia Messenger, which is out of Mississippi. And from that question and answer column, he actually put together a book called Questions and Answers. Here again, you're welcome to look at that later. But for this class, we're going to use his book, The Providence, the Silent Sovereignty of God. If you want a copy and don't feel comfortable ordering your own copy, let me know and I'll get you one. They're about $10 plus shipping. So depending on how many we order at one time, the shipping, comes down. So if you're interested in a copy, let me know and we'll get you a copy. Or you can just order it. If you're a Amazon Prime person, then you can get it there and get free shipping. So anyway, any questions about Cecil? Anything else you want to know about him? Very nice. He was married. His first wife died, 4 or 5 years ago? Something like that. Steve, do you know?
Can't remember.
Yeah. It's been... Wendy was her name, yeah. He has since remarried, too. Y'all know that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, anyway. All right. Any questions before we get started? Before I push the button.
Great book. We studied in our men's class.
Have you? Oh, well, why don't you come on up here?
That was 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. It is a very good book, so in my opinion. So. All right. So, introduction. Providence is commonly translated foresight, but it literally means seeing something beforehand. There's 2 types of providences. General providence, which refers to God's continued care for his entire creation. Moses, Jesus, and Paul all spoke of it, and I've given you references for that. And then there's special providence, which is the particular care God exercises toward his faithful children. And this is the primary one that Cecil talks about in the book. Although the phrase providence of God is not found in Scripture, the concept is. Nehemiah saw the providential hand of God preserving the Israelites as a people for the accomplishment of God's promises in Nehemiah 9. God's special providence aided the patriarchs and extends from them to us. The writer of Hebrews reminded us of this in Hebrews 11:39 through 40. I give you the scriptures so you can look them up later, not necessarily that we go over them here in class. Realizing God has not retired, but is still working to bless His people, encourages us in service to Him and to others, knowing that in the Lord our labor is not in vain. Any questions or comments on the introduction? I'll stop every once in a while and ask for comments or questions, but you'll see we do have some discussion questions we'll actually be going over at the end of class. So what is providence? Deism is the view that God exists and created the world in the beginning, but beyond that, God has no active engagement in the world. Deists refuse to recognize the biblical truths of incarnation, the atonement, the authority of the scriptures, miracles, the church, prayer, etc. Can anyone name any well-known deists? Pardon?
Most of the founding fathers.
Most of the founding fathers, absolutely. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John and Abigail Adams, Dolly Madison, and James Monroe were all deists. It is what it is. Dualism is when people blame all the good on God and all the bad on the devil. They're trying to make it easier to believe and love God by exempting Him from anything that appears to be bad and crediting Him with everything that appears to be good. The providence of God is the doctrine of God's involvement in the world and in the daily affairs of our lives. Everything that happens does so because God wills it to happen before it happens, and wills it to happen in the way that it happens.
I have a question, Lynn.
Yes, sir.
What's the difference in saying allows it to happen and wills it to happen? And if you're going to answer that in one of the other things, or less than something, you can wait.
I'm having a drink of water so I can think about it.
What is the question?
The question is, what's the difference in God willing something to happen and allowing something to happen?
Did God will or allow the devil to torment Job?
Job was what I was thinking about. That was the example I was thinking about. I think that's the case of God allowing Satan to do his thing. I look at willing, when God wills something, that is His plan. He has His plan. This is the way it's going to be. This is what He wants. What He wants to happen.
What about and all works together for good? That part's doesn't seem like that one's a will. That seems like an allow.
Yeah, could be. Will you say something?
David.
David? You talking about David or Joseph?
No, when he had the affair.
Oh.
But that was a will because there was a big agreement for it.
Well, we're going to actually, that's part of the providence. She's talking about David having an affair with Bathsheba. Was that a will or was that an allow? That's a deeper question, and we will cover that. I think in 4 weeks, 3 weeks. So put it on your calendar.
Stay tuned.
It's a tease to get Henley back in class.
I'll wait.
Would you like me to withdraw the question?
No. No.
Just wait 4 weeks.
It's a good question.
Most likely the difference between those two is who is in control of a particular event. Not the overall thing, but of the particular event.
Yeah.
We're raising our kids. We will our kids to go with us to the store. It's their decision if they sit on the left side or the right side of the car, providing it's got a high seat or whatever. But sorry, willing.
Will or allow?
Allow.
Will or allow?
We allow them to sit on either side of
Yeah, yeah.
the back seat, but we will them to go to the store with
Yeah.
us. So that's in our control, then which position they sit in the car. That's the fine
Not
difference
really,
I
that's
see.
true.
Lynn, are you gonna discuss God's will and the free will that he gives?
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's it's either 3 or 4
Yes.
weeks. It is,
I can wait.
the free will comes up.
3 weeks.
It's a 3 week,
Yes.
3 weeks. We talk about free will.
I'll wait, Lynn.
You'll wait?
I'll tell you my question.
So,
Go
What
ahead.
about free willing?
huh?
What about free willing?
Free willing? I don't think that's the
That's
same.
in 6 weeks.
But, yeah, we cover free will in depth, so if you can hang
Page
on to
two,
that.
page 2, I think will be good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, as you know, Larry, when you're teaching, sometimes I'm actually reading, I'm like week 5 and 6 right now. So I get some of confused what we talk about today versus what I read, earlier in the week. So. But I'm sure you never had that problem.
Never.
What do you call it when God works everything to the good of those who love him? What is that?
Well, I call it Romans 8:28.
I've always thought of that as providence.
Okay. Yeah, that is part of Providence, yeah. And we talk about Romans 8:28 in that's an entire week, too.
I think of the providence of things that happen bad in my life, not necessarily because God willed it, but because the devil or one of his minions or my stupid decisions make a mistake, but God changes it for my good eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But because God is outside of time, he knows where it's
here we
going to
go.
Well,
Here we go. Time and space. I'm sorry. I think some of these questions are answered, and I'm not putting them off because we will be dealing with them.
So Lynn, this definition of providence is, this author's definition?
Yeah, this is out of his book. Yeah,
That whole sentence?
pretty much, yeah.
Oh.
Now, I would say this, I pulled other resources to put in the class,
But we're talking about these.
but 80% of what I present comes out of the book or a variant of the book. I mean, a variant of what he said. Cecil talks up here sometimes, and I have to bring it down.
Okay.
Did y'all find that out?
I would think that anything that is evil, God is not God's will, but that it's allowed.
That's a good statement, and we do cover that. Yeah, that comes in the free will class too. Continuing on, the concept.
Everybody has a problem with that.
Well, you just have to be in class, Marie.
That's all right.
The concept of providence presumes that God is still at work in the world he created. Provide, the word provide is the root that comes from the word providence, or vice versa. God does provide good things for his people, and his loving care is always behind his every action on our behalf. We are to cast all our anxieties on God because he cares for us. That's 1 Peter 5:7. God keeps his promises. Scripture makes several promises to God's faithful that, if true, require that God is still at work on behalf of his children today. And I'll give you 5 scriptures for that so you can read at home. If God does not affect anything currently occurring in the world, these promises are all meaningless or false. Some will ask then, if God turns calamities into assets, provides a way to escape to accompany every temptation, and is always protectively with us, how is that different from miracles and the actualized and the nature and purpose of biblical miracles we'll talk about in just a second. Any questions on providence and God's promises? When I say providence here, I'm talking about the definition of providence.
So are this in the context of those who love God? Because I can think of calamities that he did not turn into assets.
Yeah, this is primarily talking about his children. Okay?
Well, he does promise hell for those who are told to depart.
He don't promise
That's a
those
promise
out-
also, yeah.
He doesn't promise those outside his family very much positive stuff, right? I mean, the Bible is generally written to his children, God's children, the New Testament, right?
Well, yeah, one time I was not a child of his, and it was still written to me. It helped me.
Yeah, parts of it, yeah. Yes, the Spirit can still move. Okay, the miracles of God. The term miracle is used very loosely in common conversation today to refer to any wonderful thing from childbirth to surviving an accident that produces severe injuries. And the Bible teaches that God is not working miracles today. It is not saying that God does not do any wonderful things today. A miracle is God's working on a plan that is above that of natural law. Providence is his utilization of natural law. In a miracle, the Lord works directly. In providence, he operates indirectly, employing means to accomplish the end. Biblical miracles were events that could not have occurred naturally. They demonstrated that the person working the miracle had the approval of God in what he said and taught. John's favorite word for miracle in his gospel was sign. I'll give you 2 examples. Nicodemus, the ruler of the Jews, recognized the significance of the miracle of Jesus. It limits God to say that if he works, it can only be through a miracle. In providence beyond miracles, miracles are a sign of God's endorsement. Providence cannot be a sign of God's approval, since it is not obvious enough to serve as such a sign. Any questions on miracles?
Yeah, it's not exactly what we have.
Lynn, I believe if our faith was stronger, we would see more miracles. We limit our ability because we don't believe.
Do you want me to read what?
That last paragraph.
Miracles are a sign of God's endorsement. Providence cannot be a sign of God's approval, since it is not obvious enough to serve as such a sign.
That first part of that second sentence is not in ours.
First part of what?
Second sentence is not on our handout. It didn't get in front of it.
Miracles are a sign of God's endorsement. God's providential working is not obvious enough to serve as such a sign. What do you not have?
Providence cannot be a sign of God's approval. That's a little different.
I don't see what you're looking at.
There's an extra sentence that she just read. It's up there, but it's not on our handout.
Look at your notes. Don't look at it. Oh.
Don't listen to what you read.
Because of space, sometimes I hit it bad. Okay? Y'all get me confused.
Who gets you confused?
Providence of Lynn.
Yeah, you don't get confused. Okay. Luke, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
I believe there'd be more miracles if our faith was strong.
Okay.
We limit ourselves.
Okay.
Can I
You be fair.
edit that?
Yes, sure.
I think we'd see more. Okay, I lost it, never mind. I had a good edit, but I just added one word.
Why is providence not a sign of God's approval?
Why is providence not a sign of God's approval?
You said up there, providence cannot be a sign of God's approval.
Since it is not obvious enough.
Well, are you just differentiating between how this is different than the signs, like when Jesus fed the 5,000?
Miracles versus
Yeah,
providence.
it's miracles versus providence, and then you get into a whole realm of what's a miracle. And we could be here for 3 hours trying to determine what's a miracle. Could we not?
Sure.
I mean, we could take a poll, and every person is going to have a different thought what a miracle is.
Well, I I've always thought of a miracle as something supernatural.
Yeah, that's the meaning of,
If it's not natural,
yeah,
it's not natural for something to happen, then that would be a miracle.
yeah,
Natural things like childbirth, those seem miraculous to us because they're so amazing, but they're very natural.
right, that's a natural law. That's a natural law.
So
Yeah.
supernatural, to me, is what makes something a miracle.
But
Yeah.
there are things that do not follow the natural law, even with childbirth. With pregnancy and with childbirth, that do not follow the natural law, because I've seen it over and over, and if they follow the natural law, there would be no child.
Well, it could be that we don't understand the natural law well enough to make
Part of a miracle is not, we don't understand how something happens sometimes. And we label it as a miracle, and it's not.
But you can
Because
put
we
all-
don't understand
I mean,
it.
you can put all the pieces of the body together, so that spark of life that we
Oh,
don't know where it comes from,
Yeah,
that's the part of miracle.
I'll agree. I agree. But, my dad, and we have some people here who know my dad, knew my dad, he's passed away now. When it came to discussion on miracles, he explained it this way, and I'll try to explain it the way he did it. A miracle is supernatural, like Wayne is saying, but then there are blessings, and sometimes we confuse blessings with miracles. And he gave the example one time. This actually happened to me. I can use it. I was visiting someone at the prison in Century, north of Pensacola. And I don't know if you've ever visited anyone in prison before. You go behind doors, and they take your shoes off, and they pat you down the whole 9 yards. Anyway, that's beside the point. So I'm coming out. Visitation's over. I'm like the last visitor leaving. And I'm out in the parking lot. And I'm the only vehicle in the parking lot. So as I'm walking to my vehicle, I look down, and there's a $100 bill. So I pick it up, and I look around, and there's nobody there. I'm the only one. So what am I supposed to do? Take it up to the jail, the prison, and say, someone lost $100? Now, was that a miracle that I found $100 laying in the parking lot? Or was that a blessing?
What day was that?
It was on a Saturday, visitation on Saturday. Now, my blessing of $100 was someone else's loss, wasn't it? Someone lost $100, and I found it. One day in Columbus, Georgia, when I was living in Phoenix City, me and my youngest son was in the mall, and that was back when Dollar Tree stores were in the mall. Remember when they actually started? They started in the mall. So my son wanted to go to the dollar store. He didn't have any money. I said, well, we can't go if you don't have any money. So we're walking down the mall, and he looked down, there's a $1 bill. To him, that was a miracle, because now he could go to the dollar store. But, someone lost that $1, but it was a blessing to him. So the question comes up, and I'm not going to spend any more, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time, because we could be here all day. The difference in a miracle. What is a miracle? Generally thinking it is supernatural. I mean, that's the definition of it. Whether they happen today or not, that's a whole different discussion. If we want, we can talk about it after class if you want to. I don't have the answer. About 8 years ago, we had a whole quarter on miracles, Jesus' miracles, and we spent a lot of time defining what a miracle is and what it isn't. And I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's just a question that needs more time than what we can give it here. And Deborah has that look on her face. Okay. You're just tired from being on vacation for 2 weeks.
1 week.
Does anybody, have anything I want to say about it, about a miracle? Okay, God is always good.
All the time.
All the time. God's providential care does not always work in ways we think best. Sometimes circumstances we might never think of as providential may actually serve a providential purpose. A faithful Christian has an automobile wreck, his car is totaled, but he either comes out unscathed or he's either crippled for life. The statement still is, the Lord was with him, God is good. And those are true statements. But God is always good, but we may not always understand his ways. God was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, saving them from the fiery furnace, and he was with Job as he was in the midst of his sudden poverty and loss of all he had. Hebrews 11:32 through 35 names several individuals and the great things they accomplished by obedient faith without specifying their victories. Then in verses 35 through 38, others are named. Obviously, God was with each of them, even in death, torture, and seeming defeat. God was providing and blessing. Some providential actions of God are not apparent until the afterlife. Just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego told Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3:17 through 18, when they were about to be thrown into the overheated furnace, we can confidently say, oh, you have to read that scripture to get the context. We can confidentially say, our God whom we serve is able, but if not, by the providence of God, we will always be victors either way. Any questions about God is always good? Yes, sir.
What would be some examples of providential actions of God that are not apparent until the afterlife?
I would give an example of providence of God being, I would say Rack Shack and Benny, because I can never get that out of my mind from VeggieTales, if you've ever seen that. Rack Shack and Benny, stepped into the fire and didn't burn. That's a miracle.
Yeah.
The fire running out of gas right as you were stepping in is providence.
Yeah.
That's how I would see it as different. Because you mentioned the car example. I can think of many times where, I either witnessed a car wreck and someone came out of it unscathed, and I was like, there was no reason that they should have ever come out of that unscathed. Or I almost pulled out and didn't pull out, and it would have been so nasty. And the reason why I didn't pull out was something that had nothing to do with my witnessing or driving. It had to do with, I just reached out and grabbed something.
Yeah.
Whereas you'd say that's providential, but, pretty
Jim's
miraculous.
question, though, is what is something that was providential or something happened providentially, but we may not know about it or really realize it until after we're dead and gone, and then something happens.
When I drop something on the floor and have to bend over to pick it up, I just figure God thinks I need to bend over.
You need to exercise. Steve?
The brother mentioned car wreck. I think that's a fair example, in my understanding, of something that you may not understand God's providential work until we get to that eternal shore, eternal dwelling. Because we don't have time, but when I was coming home from college one time, I almost had an accident. And I don't know how, to this day, I have gone back and looked and tried to analyze the scene, to figure out how in the world did my car do what it did, and me come out completely unscathed. I like the old poem that we've all familiar with, the footprints in the sand, and God says, I know it's fabricated, but yet it's encouraging to me that God says I was carrying you. And so, anyway, I think that's fair.
I don't have an exact example, but like he said, I'm sure there's something going to happen.
I think we take for granted all the interactions we have with people that are providential, unexpected interaction that has long-term consequences. And we don't think about those ripples that we cause and effect.
And I like to think that someday in heaven, I'm going to look back and say,
that was the reason,
I mean, all these things that happen for a reason, that you just don't give them credit.
Our minds cannot comprehend it, probably.
So Lynn, what's the difference in providence and coincidence?
For those who love the Lord, there are no coincidences.
You answer it, Lynn.
Could be a coincidence that the piano fell right as the guy walked under it.
Yeah.
That's a coincidence.
And you have to throw in divine intervention in that group too, right? All right.
Where I think it says coincidence is when God just chooses to act anonymously.
Yeah, good grief, yeah. If God's providential activity actually does change outcomes, how is that different from performing miracles? He can make things happen without it actually being a miracle, couldn't it? Can't he?
We don't really, I don't think we give God enough credit for how he designed things.
Yeah, you're right.
Because he designed things so that these laws, our brains, our bodies, everything kind of like you said, works together for the good of those who love the Lord.
Yeah.
So it's hard to understand that just how awesome that is and how those things can cause things to happen that are in favor of those who love the Lord. And but we just got to trust God's design.
Yeah, have to accept it. Yeah, trust it. It's a good word. Any other comments?
Where does prayer play a part of this?
We're going to actually, prayer is the top topic. We'll talk about prayer. So.
Part of his design.
I think if it happens to you, sometimes you feel like that's a miracle.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it happens to Jennifer, maybe it's Providence.
Yeah. That's like major and minor surgery, right?
Yeah.
Y'all do know what the difference in major and minor surgery is, right?
Yours or mine?
If it's me, it's major. If it's you, it's minor. We tend to see the hand of God only in miracles. How is the hand of God also present in the everyday events of life? As Cecil will use this example, Chronicle, the daily newspaper, but I added TV news, for example. So in other words, what part is God playing in
I think God
what's happening?
allows bad things to happen so we recognize evil. And we recognize evil people.
Yeah.
Sometimes if he doesn't allow something bad to occur, we question whether maybe that person is good or a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But when he allows things to happen that are evil, then we recognize immediately this is evil.
We should recognize it. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
When I think about good and evil, I think about Job.
Right.
Okay. Job was a fabulously wealthy man, and he lost literally
everything. Yeah.
Okay. But one thing, he never lost his faith in God.
Exactly.
Okay. And Job didn't do anything to merit being punished like he was.
Right. No.
But nevertheless, he never lost his faith in God.
Yep.
Okay. He knew the difference between right and wrong, and he understood that regardless of what happened to him, that the will of God was of the utmost importance. Above anything that he had, anything he wanted, anything he did. And as long as he maintained his faith in God, he would ultimately be rewarded by God.
Yep.
Okay. And so God didn't do evil to Job. He allowed evil things to happen to Job.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we keep Job in mind and understand that if we maintain our faith like he did, God will reward us like he rewarded Job for his faith.
Yeah, Job is a great example for us. Yeah. Anybody else? So when something good happens, Christians often say God is good. How can Christians know that God is always good even when something bad happens?
Job.
Faith. That's
Faith.
what faith is.
Faith.
From what you see.
Yeah.
You know, I always use the story of Job. It wasn't about him being punished. It was about him glorifying God.
Yeah, absolutely.
He endured.
Yeah.
The punishment just seems like not right, but right. I mean, I can understand understand it, that just doesn't seem like right, the right
No,
word.
it was,
Well,
He glorified God through his, and even questioning God. You know, he
still stood firm.
still stood firm.
Yeah. Yep.
You talk about the ultimate glorification.
And even his wife turned against him,
Yeah.
right? So, and he had boils from his head to his toes. If you ever had a boil, you know what that could feel like. So.
I just think about how ultimately, I mean, God is God and we are not.
Right.
I am not. And He provides, but He doesn't have to provide what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think frequently about all the martyrs, all the Christians in the first century who were killed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm talking about in the Bible times,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
And how, you know, we could look and go, gee, well, what was the purpose or whatever? I don't understand it,
Yeah.
but they didn't struggle with that. Or at least certain ones. It talks about how they, you know, they were just, their eyes were looking at God. They were just trusting Him, and they counted it an honor, I think it said, or a glory, to die for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, God was providing for them too, but it's not going to be what we think it'll be.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise,
Sometimes
I
our
don't think
definition,
we're more spiritual than them or better than them, and that's why we're not being, you know. So that's a lot of suffering.
sometimes our definition of bad is colored by the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we think it's bad when we lose our material things. We don't really talk about bad when we lose our faith or that, you know, we don't talk about those things as necessarily bad.
Yeah.
But we talk about bad all the time. If we lost material things, if we lose our life, all those things are bad.
Yeah. Things can be replaced.
Those can be bad, but they're not necessarily evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things bad happen, but that doesn't mean evil is occurring.
Man, I've seen through the years that even the attitude of Christians has changed at funerals. Used to be it was a solemn, sad, sorrowful thing, and I've seen that funeral be hilarious.
Yeah.
You know, everybody just thrilled to have known him or be with him and the work he did, and you know, I didn't mean no one was sad, but I know the outcome was much different.
We have memorials now, and they seem to be more on the positive side.
Celebration.
Celebration of life. Yeah. Yeah.
So Lynn, the topic of providence, I mean, it's a very deep, very high, whatever you want to look at.
You just wait. We ain't got nothing yet. I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
think, you know, we're kind of trying to figure out how God works. I mean, which, I don't know, I'm reminded of the scripture where it says his thoughts are higher than our thoughts.
Yeah.
His ways are higher than our ways.
Yeah.
He may be having a good laugh right now.
Exactly.
I was trying to figure out.
And in 13 weeks, we're not going to determine what his plan is. I mean, overall plan is.
So anyway, I mean, it's still a worthy endeavor. I'm not saying, but it's.
I don't think, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks. And traditionally, the Church of Christ, we don't talk about the sovereignty of God very much. Now, our Calvinist and Reformed friends, that's all they talk, not all, but they talk about that very heavily. But we as a tradition have not in the past. And that's where I think we've fallen short of fully understanding God's overall being, a purpose, or whatever you want to say. Yeah. That's from the book of Lynn.
But Lynn, I think that's a great point, because I think the story of Job is not really about Job. It's really about God versus Satan.
Yeah.
The sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
And if we look at it from that perspective, it can open our minds up a lot. Instead of just saying, I've got to beat this one little thing that's happening bad to me. I've got to trust in God's sovereignty. I've got to know He's got a plan.
Yeah. Shane?
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of the book of Job, the most of the book
is about people trying to tell Job
Yeah.
what God was thinking.
Yeah.
These things
Right.
happen.
Yeah.
I don't like that. Most of the book. Yeah. And when it gets to the end and God gets a turn to talk, he says, "You guys are all idiots." Yeah. Right? Yeah. So the whole book is all of this speculation on why God did what he did. Yeah. And God basically says, you guys don't have any clue of why I did what I did or what's going on, and so you just stop talking. Yeah. Right? And so, when we talk about understanding the providence of God, we're never going to understand it. No. We're like the guys in the book of Job trying to say, this is what God was thinking when he did that. Yeah. And God's saying, no, you don't know what I'm thinking, and you don't know what I'm talking about. And that's one of the things we have to grasp with. And we do the same thing today, don't we? Yeah. I mean, when something happens, we have that tendency of saying, God, why did you do this? But,
well, why does God know how many hairs that are on my head and how many I lost down the drain this morning? That makes no sense at all to me. But he does.
He does, yeah.
So there are things that I don't understand, obviously.
Yeah. And going back to what Todd was saying, we have that, like Joe Bean says, that warfare going on, the seen against the unseen. We don't know what all is going on out there in the spiritual realm. And we just have to trust God is in control. God will win in the outcome, in the bottom line. It's already won, yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. So anyway. All right, the last question is, if someone wants to talk about it, that's fine. More or less to get you thinking. In what moments in your life would a proper understanding of God's providence have been helpful to you? Anyone want to say anything? Do you have an example you're willing to talk about? It's more or less a thought question. So, something for you to ponder on. Next week, you're going to have to bring us some boiled peanuts. I haven't had any good home boiled peanuts in a long time.
Leave my amount out.
Me too.
None left?
They're gone already?
No.
Some of the best boiled peanuts I ever had. I visited an aunt and uncle just outside of Andalusia, Carolina. Some of y'all go through there. And my cousins and I jumped in the back of my uncle's pickup truck when you could do that. We went to a farm that he was a friend of the farmer who grew peanuts, and we actually pulled them right out of the ground, took them to my grandmother's house, unstemmed them, washed them, whatever, and boiled them right then and there. I mean, that was like farm to table and all in one setting.
Did you do big ones or small ones, Gary?
Big ones.
Ooh.
They're from grocery outlets where I found green peanuts to boil.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You can eat.
Cajun flavored? How did you?
I did regular, just a lot of salt, so take your blood pressure meds. Lots of salt.
That means you are going to bring them?
I would have brought them today, but I figured I'd been run out.
Nope.
Because I had boiled peanuts.
Just like
I'll
pinto
protect you.
beans.
Pinto, yeah. Jim?
I'm not sure how this fits into what we're talking about. I thought we were studying, well, anyway. Something that is just popping in my mind. Right now, we as a country, we're being told daily, we lost soldiers. We're going to spend $3 trillion for this. We've got this hurricane that hit Louisiana. And you know what? A month ago, does anybody remember what the catastrophe was a month ago? Remember the country of Haiti?
Yes.
Have you heard anything about that?
The earthquake, no.
It just disappeared. But we as a people, aren't we supposed to be remembering those people and helping them? We don't, because nobody's even talking about it. And that, I think, is part of the problem of Providence, is that it was here yesterday and it's gone.
Yeah. How soon we forget sometimes.
That is a symptom of mankind's tendency to go look for the next thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a challenge with the news and clickbait, whole category. And
And we also get desensitized to where it's like, it's
Yeah.
just like,
One more.
I can't, if I get so upset again and again, it's just, where we get a hardness.
Okay, I'll move on over. Next week, the title is Providence is Perhaps. That sounds confusing, but if I throw out the phrase providentially hindered, does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Paul going.
You grew up in the
That's
Church of
done.
Christ, you probably heard that phrase, providentially hindered. And that's what we're gonna talk about next week. So, everyone have a, what? That's my cliffhanger. And in 4 weeks is free will.
Free will.